question of everyone about voting. There are 9 of you with an alternate, and the question is, are we going to run everything by majority vote, or are we going to work by consensus? So if anyone has, is there any rule, by the way, that the city has that the task force has to work by majority vote, or can it work by consensus? So I'll start with the mayor and ask you, is there any rule about how the task force will vote to arrive at its recommendations?
No. So
okay.
I think it's up to you all to decide.
Okay.
Decide those
right.
rules.
So if anyone wants to weigh in
Judge,
right now.
Judge, if I could add a little bit to the mayor's response. When the task force is ready to make final recommendations or make recommendations to the council, those we would ask to have an actual vote, a motion and a second and an actual vote.
All right, so we're going to vote them, but we'll work by majority vote. And our job is, again, to come up with recommendations, if any, and we will arrive at them by majority vote. And then a motion made will follow parliamentary procedures. And then once we have the recommendations finalized, then they will go to the council for consideration. Thank you for that. So we're now going to take a few minutes to talk about the Brown Act, so we understand what the rules are regarding the right of the public to know what it is we're doing.
And John, can I just add one more thing, because we decided we're going to make recommendations and make decisions based on majority vote, and it goes back to what's required to have a public meeting. So when we get to the stage where we're making decisions or we're voting on making recommendations, members of the task force, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, are not allowed to confer outside of a public meeting with that majority number. So for example, if you want to confer or discuss an item with other members on the task force, you're limited up to, I think if they're 9, they're limited up to 4. Is that correct, John?
That's correct. But one thing you do want to make sure you're careful of is that the other members of the task force that you're talking with, that they haven't been talking to other members of the task force. That's sort of where those serial meetings come into play, where you're having one-on-one conversations, but eventually you're developing a concurrence among a majority. So so Katie Krauss and Scott McCrossin, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
All right.
Once
ready with your questions. Again, we're gathering information. We want to know everything we can possibly know about the school resource officer.
Okay, so before I go on to the school resource officer, Judge Cordell, do we want to do today at all an introduction to our complaint process? Or are we holding that, because Scott is prepared for that, but if you want to do it at meeting 4, then he'll do that at that time?
Yeah, what I'd like to do, let's see how we move today, but right now I'd like to focus and get as much information as we can. So stand by, we may indeed want to have ample time to even look into the complaint process. So right now, let's just look at school resource officer.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Captain Katie Krauss. I've been at Los Altos PD for 9 years, and I'm currently the captain overseeing operations, which does include the school resource officer program. I served as the school resource officer for 3 years, so I do have knowledge and background in this position. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over kind of the history of the school resource officer position when it started. I'll talk a little bit about what our current program looks like, what specialized training and how the selection goes, and then I'll be available to answer any questions after that. So just in general, our school resource officer program, it started in 1987. And the goal of it at the time was to reduce the presence of juveniles in the criminal justice system. And by how to do that was to identify the low risk students, low level intervention tactics for students that might be struggling. And that was accomplished through education, through counseling, diversion programs, and building positive relationships between the police department and young people. So again, this was back in 1987, and this information we got from speaking to our initial first SRO who served for the department. There was significant community pressure surrounding police response to juvenile crimes, both in the schools and in the community at that time. And the response was that police were responding to crimes with two things, either arresting or citation for juveniles committing crimes. And so the purpose was to have the SRO program was to open the doors for other low-level intervention through the counseling diversion or other referrals to community programs. So one thing that did come out of that, there was a big focus with the community with juvenile gatherings with alcohol and drugs. So we did have a municipal code that got put into effect at that time as well regarding juvenile parties. So that's where that municipal code did come from, was during that same era. And the SRO program was partly focused on having a presence in the schools through our DARE program. And it was fully implemented in the private schools. And there was also a DARE component in our public schools as well. And so they would present education pieces as well. So that's where it kind of started at back in 1987. Our current program now, it still maintains the same focus of building relationships and fostering trust. That is the model that we follow. And so we currently have one school resource officer, and they serve 16 schools. They service the public and the private schools. And they are exactly what it says. They're a resource to schools, parents, and community groups, and obviously also to the youth. There is the liaison between the department and the schools, whether that's school administration, and also to the parents. Because they're specially trained in juvenile issues, they are a resource, and they have a higher level of knowledge about juvenile law, things like child abuse, and we'll go into some of the specialized training that they do get. Currently, some of the services that we provide through our SRO program, at the high school, they do presentations to the health program, and that's on drug and alcohol abuse. We have a Drunk Busters program that we do at the high school. We have pedal carts, and we have goggles that simulate alcohol and drug intoxication. And so they do a lesson on drug and alcohol abuse, and then the students go through a track in the go-karts just to show the impairment level and what impact it has on their driving skills. We also do the DARE program. The DARE program is not done at the high school. That's done at some of our private schools and one of our public schools. It's a 10-week program taught to 5th and 6th graders, and I know we're not discussing anything but the high school, but I just want to give you a sense of what the school resource officer's scope of responsibility is. The current DARE program is not the Say No to Drugs program that some of you may have gone through when you were in school. It is a new program that discusses more good decision-making, talks about peer pressure, internet safety, cyberbullying, and basically just teaches the kids how to make good decisions. Drug and alcohol is 2 lessons out of the 10. So it is definitely less of a focus on that. What the school resource officer spends most of their time doing is the custom presentations. We have a big education component to our school resource officer position. So the custom presentations, they cater to the needs of the school or community groups. School administration or teachers reach out to our school resource officer discussing issues that they might be having in the classroom. For example, for a while it was cyberbullying. And so we came and created a program and then came and taught it to the kids who were struggling with the cyberbullying aspect or internet safety. The SRO does these classes to address the immediate concerns of the school teachers, administration, or parents. These presentations are also done to PTOs, our parent-teacher groups, and community groups as well that service children. Some of those classes that they do cyberbullying, internet safety, drug, alcohol abuse. They've done stranger danger. For kinder and first grade, it's a community helper type presentations. And for our community groups, we also do the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. We do presentations, tours here at the police department as well. And we also have done an education series where our SRO has taught classes for youth and parents on these same topics. We also do a very comprehensive active shooter presentation program, and that is for all of our public and private schools. So our school resource officer goes and meets with all school staff and trains them in the county protocol. They conduct walkthroughs with school administration and provide input on increased security. And they meet with staff one-on-one about classroom security measures. When I was a school resource officer, a lot of teachers had concerns about how to set up barricades, and we would even do presentations to the students like the kinders and first, that the teachers didn't know how to present to threats at a young age. And so our school resource officers will come in and do presentations to the students and try to explain it in a way that makes them feel safe. For example, if a bad guy comes with a stick or a brick or is driving around unsafely, these are the steps we would take. In the area of mental health, this is also an area that our school resource officer spends a lot of time at the high school and the middle schools. Obviously, as most of you guys know, our mental health, there's been an increase in mental health crises among our, and so our school resource officer works with school administration and mental health professionals to aid these students who are dealing with these mental health issues. They provide support to the families who needed. So if we get a call of somebody who might be experiencing a mental health crisis, who has threatened suicide or self-harm, that is a police matter that they can take them on the 5150 hold. So we go out and do an evaluation, meet with the student, talk to the parents and the teachers, and then get them the help that they need by taking them to the proper hospital for treatment. In addition to that, we have other events that the school resource officer typically heads up. Ice Cream with a Cop was one we did last year, which was just to build relationships with the younger youth. We did Pack a Patrol Car, where we packed 2 police vehicles with school supplies and backpacks, and then gave it to the district to distribute out for needy students, as well as a coat drive last winter for the same thing. And that's all things that the school resource officer does. And again, they provide the resources to preschools all the way up into the community groups that are a little bit older. So the selection process. The selection process is fairly rigorous. You have to apply to be the school resource officer, and it's a position you would hold for 3 years, unless for some reason you have to leave the position earlier. It's a 3-year assignment. The school resource officer is, there's qualifications they have to meet. They have to be performing at a meet standard level, so they can't have on their evaluations any needs improvement or issues in their evaluations. They have to have demonstrated some kind of interest or desire to work with youth. They have to show an ability to fulfill the duties of the school resource officer. They have to be organized. The school resource officer, while they are supervised they have a sergeant that oversees them, they do have a lot of freedom in their schedule because they basically get called to different things all the time. And so there is a lot of self-management that has to come in with that position. And our school resource officer has to interact appropriately with citizens and fellow officers. So we obviously will not select someone who had, internal affairs against them or anything of that nature. So in order to, when we're looking at someone who's applied, they put in an application, which is a memo that explains their qualifications and interests. Once those have all been submitted, we're reviewing, which typically is the operations captain and the detective sergeant. The SRO works underneath investigation services. So there's patrol and then there's detectives. The SRO is actually considered one of our detectives because they do investigate youth crimes and crimes against youth, for example, child abuse or sexual assault. And so they put in their application and then review their evaluations. We get yearly performance evaluations, so it includes a review of those. We talk to all of the applicant supervisors and get feedback on that. And then we also have an oral board exam, so an interview process that we do. And that oral board process also includes stakeholders. So we'll have administration or teachers will be invited to be part of the oral board, and they are part of the decision-making process for who we select for that position. In the past, we've had a private school teacher. We've also had one of the vice principals from the high school was part of our oral board panel. And again, they serve for 3 years. Once they are selected, they do go through some different trainings. The one that is required by state law, it's a 40-hour school resource officer class. So they go through and they learn about juvenile crime, Miranda, mental health crises, working with administration. So that's the 40-hour class that is mandated by POST. POST is the organization that oversees all of our training. So it's a POST class. So that's a 40-hour class, so 1 week. In order to be a DARE officer, they have to complete an 80-hour, 2-week DARE program class. They also are required to go to a class, it's called Multidisciplinary Interview Class, or MDI. That's an interview forensic process of how to get information from a child who might have experienced sexual or childhood abuse. And a lot of times there's a special way to interview them in order to get the information you need for your investigation. That's a 24-hour class that they have to go to. And then they also take classes on juvenile law, child abuse, child sexual exploitation, and interview and interrogation are extra classes that our school resource officer is expected to complete. And the reason that we do that, and our school resource officer obviously works almost exclusively with youth. So the classes we send them to, we want them to be focused on youth law and for youth crime and victims of crimes. So I think I went through that. And so I've gone through kind of what our school resource program is, but I do also want to explain what it isn't. I think a lot of people kind of get the mindset of every school resource officer program is the same because we have the same name. They're all called SROs. No matter what district you go to, it's an SRO. However, the programs look very, very different depending on your jurisdiction. So for example, some other jurisdictions are funded by the school district partly. So the school district will put in money and the district and the department puts in money, and it's a shared resource. All of our funding comes strictly from the police department. The school does not fund all of our school resource officer programs. So we get no funding from the district at all. It is self-funded for the department. And in some jurisdictions, the school resource officer is assigned to a specific school. Ours is not. Our school resource officer goes to all 16 schools plus all the preschools in town. There is no set time that they are told to be at a specific school. They go to where the needs are. They stop by schools intermittently just to check in with students, build relationships, be present on campus. Some school resource officer programs have uniformed officers on campus for enforcement purposes. Ours is not that model. Sometimes our officer is in uniform, our SRO. Sometimes he's in a polo shirt and jeans. We try to vary the uniform that they're wearing. We want them to be approachable for the students, and we know that the uniform can be intimidating, and so we try to mix up the uniform in order to fix that. And I know we're going to get into in a further meeting, depending on what you request, our calls for service, our stats, our arrests, our citations on campus, and we will get whatever information you guys are requesting. I did a cursory check of last year's stats, and I will have you know that we have no self-initiated arrests on campus. We do not go on campus walking around looking for violations. We're not looking for dress code violations. We're not there looking for kids smoking weed in the bathrooms. All of our arrests or citations were based on calls for service. So the administration called us or a counselor called us and we responded to the school, and then an arrest or citation was made at that time. But our model is not to walk around trying to enforce laws on campus. We do enforcement based on calls for service. We are on campus to build relationships and get to know the students. So that's kind of a general of our current program. I'm happy to answer questions that might come up. And of course, the stats and stuff, whatever you request, we can't get them for you immediately, but we could get them for you by the next meeting.
Members, I'm just going to throw out a few questions as that came to me. So can you tell us what kind of person, officer, volunteers to be an SRO?
That's a good question. It's funny because when we do interviews, when we first hire someone, we'll ask, what positions do you want to do during your time here? Not many of them say school resource officer, to be honest with you. It is a very narrow group of people who actually enjoy working with the youth in that type of setting. Typically, the people who want to be school resource officers have some kind of history in youth sports. They either were heavily involved in youth sports or youth activities, or we had one SRO who their SRO had made a huge impact on them when they were younger, and that's the reason they became an officer, so therefore they want to get back. So we get some people who really enjoy working with youth, and then some people who felt like a school resource officer kind of turned them around and they want to get back in that same manner. Our school resource officers typically are some of our more outgoing officers. You have to be able to walk around the campus and make contact and say hello to students who may or may not want you there. And so you can't be someone who's shy or withdrawn. You have to be somebody who's comfortable introducing yourself. You also have to be approachable. As an officer, you can't be someone who's very standoffish or shy, because unfortunately, there are situations that come up. I'm specifically talking like sexual abuse and child abuse. You have to have very real conversations about very difficult topics with youth. And so you have to have an officer who's very skilled in their communication style to be able to get that information and build that rapport with students in order to get that necessary information to keep them safe. So I would say somebody who's gregarious, outgoing, and with really good communication skills is who usually puts in for SRO.
Okay, go right ahead, Harvey.
You able to?
I was just wondering, like, who participates in these interviews and selection process? Is the school administration, parents, or student groups involved in selecting the SRO?
Thank you, Harvey. And so our typical interview panel, it changes. It's usually myself or whoever is in charge of the operations for the police department. It's usually the ISD, that's Investigative Services Sergeant. That's going to be that person's supervisor. So typically they would sit in on the interviews. And then we try to bring in a member from the schools. So like I said before, we've had a teacher from St. Simon's School, which is one of our private schools in town, that participates in the DARE program. So she was part of the interview process. And then we've had Suzanne Woolfolk from the high school. She sat on the interview process as well. And then we asked them for their feedback. So a typical interview process for all positions of the police department, an oral board usually is 3 to 4 people is part of the interview process. So that's fairly standard to have that many people.
Thank you, Harvey. Anyone else from the task force have a hand raised? I have many more questions. Ron, just go right ahead. Who's up?
This is John Fennell. To make sure I'm unmuted.
You are, John. Go ahead.
Katie, at Los Altos High School, are there any security guards at Los Altos High School? At some schools, there's police officers full time, but I take it that that's not the case with Los Altos.
So that's a good question. And of course, when we get school administration on, they'll be able to go on into this a little bit further for you. Currently, I know the high school has at least 1 full-time security officer. At one time, they had 2. I don't know if they hired back that second position. So they do have full-time security that are there. And that's why we're only called when we're not full-time security for them. We don't have an office on campus, and we are not used for school security.
So is that security officer in uniform, and are they armed?
The school security officer they hire is not armed. They wear a Los Altos High School polo or t-shirt typically to identify themselves. And they drive around in a golf cart that says security on the front.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John.
That order.
And let me add one thing. When you ask a question, I just follow the rule of the 3 Bs: be brief, be clear, be seated. So do not give a speech, do not give a lecture, just ask your question. This captain is wonderful at answering questions. I mean, I appreciate you're answering exactly what's asked. I thank you for that. So, and that's a rarity. So when you ask a question, please just make it direct, clear, 1 sentence, and then we'll get the information. Okay, who's up next?
Okay, just going down the list on my screen here, Renee, you're next.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Officer Krauss. So I have a few questions. One, can officers with complaints, like, publicly submitted complaints, still become SROs?
So like I mentioned before, we review someone's personnel file before the selection and the interview process. And so we would look and see what complaints, if someone has an internal affairs complaint, it gets put in their personnel file for a period of time. So those are in there. But in addition, we also read through someone's evaluations. And in that, sergeants will sometimes mention any contact or interactions they've had with the public that might have been negative. So I'm not going to say that we have something in our policy that says if you have an IA complaint or in the past you will never be an SRO. That's not in our policy selection process, but that is something that we obviously consider when we are making our selection, is what their interactions have been with the public, what their complaint history might be.
Okay. And then another follow-up on that is you didn't mention bias training as part of the specialized training. So I'm wondering, do you have bias training as part of your regular officer training?
We do. I'll let Captain McCross, and he's in charge of training. He'll go over what our bias-based training is so that you guys have an understanding of that. It is department-wide, but he'll go through that.
Would you like me to cover that now?
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay, so POST requires that we complete a bias-based policing course that's about 4 hours long. Actually, it's exactly 4 hours long every 5 years, but we do go in excess of that. In fact, we did our 5-year training last September, and then just last month, we completed another 2-hour training that POST just released. And we have another training that will cover some bias-based issues coming up in February that's currently scheduled. So that's kind of our ongoing training plan. Our plan is to have at least 4 hours annually, and sometimes as much as 8. Some of those classes may cover something called fair and impartial policing. So any opportunities we see to present that training, racial profiling training, bias-based policing training, we do implement that.
Who gives the training? Is it all
mute,
post?
Judge Cordell.
I shouldn't be. That's interesting.
No, you're not.
No, I'm not. So, Captain, who is it? All post training?
No, it's not. It's not all post training. The bias-based police training from POST is one of the courses that we implement. For example, the one coming up in February is an organization called Islamic Network Group, ING, and they put on a variety of courses. We're doing a 2-hour course with them, and then we're going to evaluate that and see if we want to expand that. Fair and impartial training is not a POST course, but it is a course that we have 2 instructors in, and we plan on putting that on in the coming year as well.
But where are the instructors? How are they taught? Where are they from? Are they within the force or outside?
Yes. So we have actually one of our instructors who was just certified for fair and impartial policing training is our school resource officer, Josh Cottrell. And then our other officer was our original bias-based policing instructor, and he's a sergeant in our patrol division right now.
Okay. With everyone, give everybody one. We'll come back.
Moira.
Hi. So Chief Galea in a previous conversation said that another point that may be causing confusion with respect to SROs is that there are also officers who are not officially the SRO who may be interacting with people near the school campus. Could you please elaborate more on the role of non-SROs with respect to them being around or near school campuses?
Absolutely. So like I said before, we respond to the school when we get calls for service. So whether it's school administration, it might be a neighbor who saw something. Our school resource officer only works 40 hours a week. He currently works Monday to Thursday, 10-hour shifts. And like I mentioned, he does a lot of presentations and classes and DARE programs at different schools. So our school resource officer is not always available to come to the high school when we get a call for service. Our preference is always to send our school resource officer because they have the specialty training. However, if he is not available, we still have to respond to the school. So we will send our regular patrol officers to the school in order to handle issues that have come up or calls that have come up. So there are many, many times that we've had maybe a 5150 or maybe a fight on campus. And in those cases, the school resource officer may go, or he may go accompanied by other officers, or he may not be available. And then regular patrol officers are the ones responding to the school in those cases.
Thank you. Next up.
Okay, Aradhana.
Hey, yeah. I have 2 questions, but the first one is, you mentioned that there was 1 officer for 16 schools, and you mentioned earlier that occasionally that creates a shortage of people to go around. Do you find that you're still able to build connections with students, which was the initial goal? Like, are students comfortable saying hi or initiating contact, or how do you measure whether you're having success at establishing rapport?
That's a good question. And I would have to say that in the past few years, because of the way our school resource officer is stretched thin among all the different schools and organizations, the high school actually came to the police department asking for a second school resource officer because they wanted someone on campus more often. Because of different hiring and staffing issues, we haven't filled that second school resource officer position, so it still has remained vacant. But that was our hope, was to have a second officer, and kind of the model would have been one officer would deal more with the DARE program and some of the elementary school programming, and then the other school resource officer would service the middle and high school. Again, that's not something we've been able to move to, but that was our goal intention initially. We would love for our school resource officer to be able to be on campus more often to build relationships, the wandering around. I know right now they try to time it in times where the kids are out and about. So whether it's the break, the lunch, before school and dismissal, because that's when the kids are out and about and they can actually walk around and make contact with people. So they try to maximize the time that they are able to spend on campus, but unfortunately, because they're pulled in so many directions, they aren't able to build those relationships. Okay, I don't know where I got cut off. All I'm gonna basically just reiterate is that since we cannot build relationships with all the students as much as we would like to, our school resource officer focuses on the students who are considered high risk. So those usually are names that school administration or teachers have reached out with concerns about. It might be mental health concerns, it might be issues at home. The student might have been involved in the criminal justice system. And so the officers will try and attempt to make more of a relationship and foster trust with those students in order to help, again, prevent them from going down a path that could be bad for them. So they focus their attention on those students who are a little bit more high risk.
Toni.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Captain, so much for being here to answer our question. So I do have two quick questions.
Okay.
Captain McCausland mentioned that a sergeant has been trained to do some of the upcoming training. And I'm just wondering, one is which sergeant was trained and what was the training that he or she went through?
You mean the bias training?
Yeah,
the bias training.
Yeah, sorry, the bias training.
It's no problem. Our sergeant who is currently trained, he's trained in bias-based policing for the post class. He's also trained in principled policing, implicit bias. He's a trainer, meaning that he is now able to go out and do the training himself. That's Sergeant Steve Spillman. He is our principal policing and bias-based trainer. And then Josh Cottrell also just got certified as a trainer as well for principal policing, fair and impartial.
Great, thank you.
No
and then my first question, you'd mentioned a few times that you respond to a lot of the mental health issues, especially 5150. So I was wondering how you collaborate with the mental health professionals on campus and what the training that the SRO goes through in order to appropriately deal with mental health issues for students.
Okay. Our school resource officer, when we get a call of a mental health crisis, they usually will meet with the school administration and the school counselors, sometimes prior to meeting with the students, just to get somewhat of a background on what's going on. So they do make contact and have relationships with the school psychologists that are on campus. And then the training that they go through, all officers, including our SRO at Los Altos PD, are trained in crisis intervention, the 40-hour class about dealing with mental health. Our entire department is trained in that.
Thank you.
Angel, next question.
And I'll just do a quick follow-up, Captain. Is that an annual training, the crisis intervention?
No, crisis intervention is a one-time 40-hour class, and then we will do updates to that. So, for example, we had the mental health response, the mobile response team. They came and did a 4-hour training with us in the last training cycle. So we do updates on that, but it is a single-time class that we just choose to do updates on, but they're not required.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right, Jeanine.
I have two questions. The first one is, and thanks, Katie, for being so open. You mentioned the interview, the oral boards to which potential SROs are subjected or invited. Has it ever been considered, or did it at some time and then it was rejected, to involve the actual a student body, especially at the high school level, not at the lower levels, but at the high school level, to include them in the interview or vetting process for candidates, just to check? Because in my view, even though a youth might not have life experience, they are very sensitive to interaction, and that might give a lot of information to the people that are making the selection or qualification of the candidate as to how well they can on the spot, interact with somebody that's younger.
We haven't, but actually that's a fantastic idea, Jeanine. We haven't ever involved the student groups in that, but that's something that we can definitely consider. Our current SRO has 1 year left in his 3-year assignment. And so we will be doing interviews again this summer for our next SRO, but that's a great idea. We have not looked at doing that before.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, you mentioned in the, when there's a call for service, no, I'm sorry. You said that at some point, resources are stretched very thinly, that the SRO will tend to focus on students that are, and I'm using your word, high risk. Mm-hmm. Therefore, they get that information from the administration as to who might be these youths on this list. So my specific question is, so when the SRO is introduced or makes contact with the student after they've gone through whatever initial things have to happen with administration or psychologists or whoever, is that introduction mediated by somebody else, like a counselor or a parent or something, or is it just a casual, the officer has that kid's name and they kind of figure out how to make casual contact with them out on the blacktop or in a classroom or something? How does that introduction happen?
Okay, so let me go through a couple of things. First of all, there's not really I don't want to clarify, there's not a list that our officers have of students that they are really concerned about. It's just through, if there's any juvenile crime and a student gets arrested or cited not at school, that always comes back to our SRO. So they're aware of a student that might have had issues with marijuana or alcohol or a fight or something like that. So there isn't like a list that administration keeps, but it's just when they're concerned about someone, administration will reach out to the SRO. How the introductions happen. When we go out to a school, if we're there to investigate, whether it's a crime that we're investigating, with the student might be a victim of a crime or maybe a suspect in a crime, or if we're going out for a mental health issue, it is very rare that our officers are meeting that student without another person present. Typically, the school administrator, a teacher, or a counselor are there and present. There are some interviews that are a little bit more sensitive, like the child abuse or sex abuse cases. And in those cases, sometimes the school administration wants to sit in on those. And we always ask the student for permission for that, because we want to do what the student is comfortable with. If the student wants this particular teacher or administrator with them in the interview, we do permit that to happen. And then as far as just touching base, so they kind of do both. They'll do the mediating with another person there, but there are times that our school resource officers are just walking around and they'll just make contact with people out at breaks, and they know a lot of the kids' names as they're walking around, and so they'll make a special effort to go to the special area, maybe where they all eat or they go to breaks, and make contact and just say a hello as they're walking by. So they kind of do a little bit of both, Jeanine.
Okay, thank you. That's all questions.
Angel, next.
Okay. Has everybody had an opportunity to ask their first questions before we start going back around the room?
Okay, Angel, what I'll do is I'll jump in now, and I just have a few questions for the captain. Do we know how much time the SRO actually spends at the high school in a given year? Any idea?
It varies. It really does.
That's okay. I don't want you to speculate. I don't
have a
idea.
number. The only way for us, if the task force were to want that, what we can do is we could probably run so when an officer goes out to the school, they put themselves out at the school, either on a call, or they might just put themselves out. We call it, you're kind of out of service at the high school. We could run that and kind of track the numbers, but it's not something that we, really look at. I would say that they spend, in a given day, which is a 10-hour workday, they're spending less than an hour a day at the high school. An hour max, I would say, is what they spend. So you're looking at 4 to 5 hours a week, maybe.
Is it likely, though, that an SRO is at the high school 5 days a week?
No.
For some period of time?
No. And well, they only work 4 days a week. And
4 days a week, I mean.
Yeah, there are times when their dare teaching schedule will have them teaching all day, and so they don't have an opportunity to stop by the high school. So they are not there every day. They do try to stop by when they can, but there are days they're not able to.
Okay, so if it were not a big deal, it'd be interesting, I think, for us to know how much actual time the SRO, maybe in just through the last school year, spent on the campus. I think people maybe have a different idea about actual time spent. That would be helpful if you can.
And the other thing for people, sorry to interrupt, Judge Cordell, is that we have one SRO who obviously from the high school, but I know from the meeting that the call-in town hall that we had, people were saying that the officers were on campus a lot. Right. There are also, we have other jurisdictions. So for example, we work very closely with Mountain View PD. And for those people who aren't aware, we have a shared high school district. So it's Mountain View, Los Altos High School District. So there's Mountain View High School and then there's Los Altos High School. But because of how the borders are, there are Mountain View, there are kids who live in Mountain View who attend Los Altos High School, and there's kids who live in Los Altos who attend Mountain View High School. And so what tends to happen is maybe there was an incident that happened over a weekend in Mountain View with some fight or some incident that happened. Well, Mountain View SROs will come to Los Altos High School to make contact with Mountain View students in order to build those same relationships, to follow up. And so when we're saying we're seeing officers on campus all the time, it's not necessarily Los Altos SRO. It could be Mountain View has several SROs that work they're trying to build the same relationships or do their own follow-up. So it's not our SRO all the time.
Interesting.
Just like our SRO does attend, we'll stop by at Mountain View High School if we have a student in Los Altos who has an issue and they need to go touch base with them.
So Mountain View Police, Mountain View SRO deal with Mountain View students, residents, and then same thing with Los Altos. They deal with the Los Altos residents.
Well, yeah, typically. So if a crime happened in Mountain View and Mountain View is going to be the one investigating it, they may have to come and do follow-up at the school, and it might happen at Los Altos High School. In addition, Mountain View also has a really strong PAL program. They have their sports programs, and they have an Explorer program. Well, some of those students attend Los Altos High School, so they stop by to meet with their Explorers and their PAL students as part of just their normally daily rotation. So when you're saying how much time I can see how much time we spend on campus, but there are resource officers from other jurisdictions that also are present on campus.
Excellent. Is there any particular period of time a person has to be a member of the police department before they can become an SRO?
Good question. They have to be here for they have to have at least 1 year police experience to apply to be the SRO.
Okay. And is the SRO evaluated each year? You said it's a 3-year assignment. Is there an evaluation done each year during the 3-year period?
Every one of our employees are evaluated on a yearly basis. Those happen, evaluation period is from, February 1 through January 31st. So that's our evaluation cycle. So every February-ish time, evaluations come out.
And who is it that does the evaluation of the SRO?
So they are under the Investigative Services Division. We call it ISD. So they're in the Detective Bureau. And so the Detective Sergeant, who right now is Sergeant Cameron Shearer, he is the one who evaluates and supervises the school resource officer.
And is the evaluation taken to consideration, input from school administrators, students, or faculty, or anyone?
No. So, the evaluation obviously is just about their performance for the year.
Right.
If the SRO had gotten any complaints, calls in, letters, commendation, or complaints, those usually are part of the evaluation process. So feedback in that way, yes, but they do not reach out and do anything extra as far as reaching out for the schools to see what their feedback is.
Okay, thank you. All right, others in the task force, any more questions for the captain?
All right, Curtis.
Captain, thank you very much.
Yes.
Is there an annual or maybe a per semester review with the school administration that says, hey, this is how the program went this semester, these are the things we want to reinforce, these are the things we want to make suggestions above and beyond they want a second SRO?
No, we don't do anything formal with that. And I think the reason behind that is the fact that I think that happens in other programs where the school district is paying part of the salary and we're paying part of the salary. So the school district in that case is part of the employer. And so therefore they have a little bit more feedback loop into that. We don't have that kind of process currently, but we have an informal process, I would say. I see Wynn and the school administrators around town or at different events and get feedback from them. And then they also have an open door policy with the chief. The superintendent and the principals and administrators have contacted the chief of police when they have certain needs or concerns.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next.
Okay, Renee.
Okay, great. I wanted to find out a little bit about data on police interactions on campus.
Okay.
What kind of data, is there any data collected specifically for campus interactions? Like students interacted with, any racial data, background, student history, and then what are the parents' rights about notifications about any interactions with police?
Good questions. So as far as what data, we don't keep special data on our school resource officer program. So it's not like we have a special file that every single time they go out there, it gets caught. But anytime our officers respond to the school, it's still captured in our system. So if there's certain stats that the task force wants us to come back with, citations, arrests, number of times on campus, those are things we can look through our computer-aided dispatch system and pull that information for you. Not all of that is going to have the race or ethnicity or gender data in that. That's something that came up at the task force meeting that we're working towards getting that RIPA data, and we're hoping to have that by 2021 is our time frame. And that would be captured then in our contacts, but currently it is not. Now, if somebody is arrested or cited, some of that information is written on the citation form, so it can be captured that way. And we could pull the police reports if the task force desires any, for example, police reports on cases that were taken in 2019. We could go through, there's not that many, each of those reports and find out that information, but it doesn't currently exist in the report.
Okay. And then the second part with the parents' rights. Yeah.
Parents' rights. That is kind of a sticky, usually if officers have contact at the school, the parents are notified. It's usually school administration that does the notification though. So if the school, has an officer come out and there's an issue with, cyberbullying, sexual assault, something of that nature, the school is the one who calls the parents, and usually the SRO will meet with the parents as well on campus or by phone to discuss the issue with the parents. Now, if you have a student who's over 18, that does change it a little bit because they are now considered an adult. And so the parent notification doesn't necessarily have to happen because they are not a legal, they don't have a legal guardian, you know what I'm saying? They're now an adult. So they have certain rights that they don't have to have their parents contacted if they're 18 years old.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess the part where the school administration informs, that seems like it's some general guideline that they do, but it seems like you're saying that might not be any kind of established policy.
It is school policy, yes. The school has a policy to contact parents when they have the police call out, or I don't know exact language, that's something you'd have to ask the school administration, but parents are notified when the police are called to deal with a student on campus.
Okay, and if the school doesn't call them and the police are just on campus for whatever reason and some incident occurs, is that still the school responsibility or is that separate?
So if we were ever to have enforcement action on campus, school administration would be involved. Okay. We are never going to come on campus and cite a student for, say, possession of marijuana without notifying the school administration that we're doing so. So they're always involved, even if we're coming on campus to deal with some kind of follow-up on something that happened off school campus, like on a weekend, and we're coming to do an interview or some kind of follow-up. We go through the office first and check in with school administration. We don't just wander around and find the student and put them on campus.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and if the student is given a citation, it's called a JCR, a juvenile contact report. So if they're given a citation, one of the check boxes on that is police have notified parents. You have to checkbox that and write the time that they were notified. So if a student is actually cited or given a citation, parents have to be notified. Okay. And that goes on campus or off campus. It's any time.
Great.
Okay, John?
Yeah, for the captains, how much gang activity is there at Los Altos High? And does the gang activity extend down? Because I'm sure there is some. Does it extend down into the junior highs?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say we have a huge problem with gangs, but issues do arise. It typically surfaces more at the beginning of the year because over the summer there's been different territorial battles that have kind of gone on, and beginning of the year we have some issues with that. That's going to be a question I would suggest that you guys bring up with school administration, because they have more information on what gang issues they're having, because they don't report everything to us, just to be honest with you. There's things they deal with internally. The gang issues do bleed out into the school, and they bleed out into the surrounding neighborhoods. So for example, when we pull the stats for times we've responded to the school, there are additional times we've responded to school gang incidents in the surrounding neighborhoods. So it's not going to come up in our computer-aided dispatch system at the high school as our location, because that's how we usually pull data, just so people know. Like, we'll pull the address of the high school and it'll pull all calls that we've been out to. But it may have happened on Jardin, or it may have happened on Alicia or one of the surrounding streets. That's not going to come back as one of our school calls, even though it might have been a gang fight involving students, because the location was off campus. But some of our gang fights happen typically after school or during lunchtime, and they typically, a lot of times, happen off campus.
Just as a follow-up, are all the gangs in the area, are they all ethnic-based gangs?
Not necessarily. So there's people of every race involved in different gang activity.
In other words, are the gangs, though, organized around a particular ethnic group, or are they integrated gangs?
I mean, I would say the largest gang issues we have would be between Norteños and Sureños, and that typically is with Hispanic gangs. But it's not to say that people of different races can't be a part of that, and it's not to say there aren't other gangs that happen that are not around ethnic lines.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Moira?
Captain, thank you so much for your time and answering so many questions. I was just wondering if it would be possible for us to get data on the number of mental health calls that the SRO responds to, or the breakdown of SRO responding to specific calls or patrol officers responding to specific calls. I'm not sure like what is possible, but.
So I just want to make sure, because I'm writing this down so I can bring it back next time. I have, you want data on mental health calls at the high school, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then secondarily, on all calls that are at the high school, a breakdown of how many SRO respond to and how many non-SRO. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
Could we also add to that, Captain, do you just have general contact data? I mean, are there just contact reports, or do you have arrest reports or data on citations, those kinds of things?
I mean, we can pull citation data on. So here's kind of what I need to figure out of what you want is there's citations that we can pull just on juveniles, but that would include off-campus things that just happen for juveniles in general. And then we can also pull citation or arrest data of things that happen at the address of the high school. So those are kind of two different.
Right. So what we're interested in are SRO activities at the high school. That's really what we're focusing on.
Okay.
For this task force. So it's the interactions, citations. Do SROs issue citations, correct?
Yes, they'll issue an ECR. Yes.
Exactly. So citations issued by SROs at the high school. So we're really concerned. Any other activity, any other activities, SROs that you have data on interacting at the high school.
Okay, and so can I clarification, how far back am I going?
2020. So if we had 2019, does the task force members, do you want to look at 2018 data?
Okay.
There's a nod from Curtis. So 2018, 2019, and then I guess it's just the 3 months into 2020.
So I'll put down 2018 to 2020. Going farther back, we might be able to pull the number of calls for service, but at a certain point, reports are purged if you go back a certain amount, depending on the crime. So going back 5 years on reports, we're not going to have those reports anymore because they get destroyed and purged from our. So there is a limit.
Right. So let's look at 2018, 2019, and then into 2020. Is that okay with task force folks? I'm getting some nods. Okay, let's see what that gets us. So all contact, whatever data you can give us, SROs interacting with on the campus.
And that includes when citations or arrests have not been made, but just a report is taken?
You got it, yes.
And that includes ones that are not SRO related, right? Regular officers.
What do you all want?
I'm seeing
I mean,
a lot
we're looking at.
So we want all police reports, arrests, citations, or other contacts, anything that happened at the high school, and then we can delve through and see which ones, as Moira asked, are SRO versus non-SRO related.
If that's possible, that would be terrific. So that'll give people a better picture of what's actually happening on the campus.
Okay.
Please.
Are any records purged in that time frame that we just asked for?
28 to 20, no, they shouldn't be. The shortest period of time, I believe, is a 3-year purge. And that's just the reports. It's still in our computer-aided dispatch system as we went out, but I couldn't pull the actual physical report. And I can't provide to the task force. I can't give you the report just because there's confidentiality issues.
Sure.
I can grab the data you need from those reports and provide them.
Do you know where the purging rule comes from? Why everything's purged every 3 years?
It's in the government code, and that's just depending on the type of crime it is. For example, if it's a homicide, we have to keep those records indefinitely. If it's a misdemeanor theft, after 3 years, that report gets purged. Okay. So it's just by government code on how long we keep different reports.
Got it. Next question, Angels. Anybody else up?
Okay, Jeanine, you're up again.
All right, I'm on. Katie, you had mentioned very briefly how Mountain View High School has a very strong PAL and Explorers presence programs activity.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't clear to me. I have some familiarity with PAL from many years ago through a lot of my male soccer players were involved in PAL, and they spoke positively of it. But they never, even though we understand PAL comes from the police department, they didn't necessarily tie it to an on-campus police presence like an SRO. Is there a literal tie between the Mountain View High SRO and PAL or Explorers?
They're heavily involved in those programs, and so basically those programs are, sports programs, boxing, different activities that youth participate in, and then they build relationships with the officers. So the Mountain View SROs are involved in the PAL program as they're part of the Youth Services Division in Mountain View. So part of that is the PAL program. So they are coming on campus just to make contact, check in with the students on a friendly basis. And then the Explorer program, obviously the Explorers are youth that are interested in a career in law enforcement. And so they stop by and check in with them as well. And that's just because it's part of their youth services program.
Okay, so historically, is there a reason why Los Altos High has never launched or either joined in collaboration with or created their own separate PAL or Explorers programs?
We used to have an Explorer program at Los Altos Police Department. We had one a while ago. It disbanded. I don't know the history on why. And I think part of it is simply about resources. We're a very, very small agency. We only have 32 sworn officers. PAL programs take a lot of resources and a lot of manpower to run programs like that. Mountain View, I think they have 100 officers, somewhere around there. So they just have more resources and personnel to run those programs. We have participated in community programs. There was a summer soccer program that when I was the SRO, I went out and worked for an entire summer to make those connections. So we do try in different ways to build relationships with community groups.
Thank you.
No problem.
Next up.
Okay, Toni.
Hey, Toni.
Thank you so much again. You've taken so much time to do this. We appreciate it.
I'm going to be here at every meeting, Toni. 3 hours a week. You're going to see me.
So you gave a great history of how the SRO program started 33 years ago with the intent of decreasing, juveniles in the justice system. Yeah. I'm just wondering if there's any data that you have to show that this has been successful in any way? Anything to show that the rate of juveniles going in from, surrounding high schools has decreased, anything like that you could get hold of?
I don't know that we've done a historical survey on that at all. And to be honest with you, Toni, we switched our computer-aided dispatch system 5 years ago, and a lot of that old data has been lost because it's on an old system we don't have access to anymore. I will let you know, just from my interactions at Challenge Team and different community organizations, is that juvenile crime and juvenile incarceration rates are down from where they were in the past. Our levels are lower, but I can't tell you from 1987 till now what they are. Unfortunately, we don't have that historical data. To be honest with you, we write very few citations for youth, whether it's at the high school or else outside of, and we don't have a very high level of arrests for youth in Los Altos. It's just juvenile crime is not a huge issue for us here, and so that's why our SRO is able to kind of devote a little bit more time working with the students who have been involved in that program, in the juvenile justice program. And Toni, I'm sure that the focus has been in the juvenile justice system has been to move away from incarceration and to move towards, education. And those, Judge Cordell knows that as well, that's kind of been the push, is to get students the support they need early to keep them out of the juvenile justice system. And I don't think those programs were around back in the 80s and 90s like they are today.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Next.
Yeah, sorry, I have a bunch of questions.
It's okay.
Go ahead, Judge Cordell.
Just have one question. Is there a policy manual or set of rules that guide the conduct of an SRO?
Not a specific SRO program, besides that there's a program, obviously there's state requirements that are in place for that 40-hour class that have to be in place, and that kind of guides our programming, is just state requirements, but we don't have a separate policy manual. Everything in our policy, for you guys, for your knowledge, is on our webpage as well. Our entire Los Altos Police Policy Manual is available for the public to look at. There are approximately 10 policies that have been redacted, and that's just for officer safety or security purposes, but none that have anything to do with youth services, juvenile detention, anything like that. That's more on tactical things. So anytime you want to look up our policies or our training history, that is all online as well.
And one quick one, you've committed to helping us to getting the stats and the data. Is there a chance we can get the data before we meet? Because if we just get it right at a meeting, then we have to digest it and figure out what we're looking at.
So John, can I ask you, I don't know my Brown Act like this guy does, so I'm going to defer to John. If I can try to get it out to them on Tuesday, if I email it to you, John, can you disseminate? Is that within policy, or
sure.
Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. We can get it out.
Okay. I don't collect the data. I have to go to our police services manager for that, so I'm not sure how long it's going to take her to collect it, but I will request it today and request she can get it to as soon as possible.
That would be wonderful. The sooner the better. That'll give us time to digest it, then we'll be able to discuss it intelligently at our next meeting. Thank you. Okay, Angel.
Renee, back to you.
Great. So I know you had mentioned that back in 1987, that's when the SRO program began, and that's where the goals were really laid out. Do the goals get revisited every year? Like, do you meet with the school district to revisit the primary purposes and goals for the SRO program, like yearly or every couple of years? And if so, like, do you have like a one-pager or something about what the current goals and purposes of the SRO program are?
We don't. Like I mentioned in a question earlier, because our people are not funded by this school, they're not considered an employee of the school, so they end up being just under our umbrella. We informally visit with the schools as far as administration through the chief of police, the superintendent, and the SRO. Trust me, the administration lets us know if we're doing things they don't want us doing. And there are times that we have to kind of push on them a little bit, to be honest with you. Sometimes they want to call the SRO cell phone directly to request them to come out on emergency calls, and we want them to follow the correct process of calling the dispatch center to do that, because we want it recorded. We want a log of what is happening, what our activities are. And sometimes the school administration doesn't want to do that because they don't want it recorded, right? They don't want the stats to show the police are coming out to campus. And so there's certain things that we revisit with them on, hey, this is not the right way to get the police out. You need to call dispatch. This is the way to go. So we do informally meet with them on that, but there is not a
128.
every year we do that. And it's part of the reason, I mean, like I said, we service 16 schools, so we'd have to have that contract or MOU or memorandum with every single school in that case. And that seems a little unrealistic for us to do that with all 16 schools, to make different agreements with each one. So no, there's nothing written between us.
Okay.
That's when you have a shared funding source.
Got it. So then you had mentioned that you haven't had any self-initiated arrests on campus. So is that like a policy? By policy, you don't do self-initiated requests, or that's just how it happened?
Policy. And the reason I brought that up was because there are some jurisdictions where the school officer is almost like a security card, like John was mentioning. They're wandering around. They might do backpack checks. They might do locker checks, paraphernalia, drugs, like things like that. That's not the model of the Los Altos SRO program, and never has been. We don't wander around looking for violations. We're not looking for, students in the bathroom smoking weed. So when I mean self-initiated, we're not walking around looking to write a citation to someone and get them in trouble on school campus. So each one of our ones, I just have from 2019 that I pulled. These have been in response to criminal threats, mostly online. Someone makes a threat of, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to beat you up. So we'll go out and investigate and sometimes write a citation for that. We have had ones for drugs, but it's been in a call for service. Whether the administration calls us, maybe there was an overdose on campus, and we go out and we find paraphernalia, we issue a citation for that. So the difference being our citations and arrests that we've made have been because of somebody calling us to the school to address or investigate something.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Aradhana?
Right. So if the school administration calls an SRO to campus and no citation is issued, or the SRO determines that that's not a valid, like something that they need to act on, is there a record of that as well?
So if the administration calls dispatch, the non-emergency or emergency line, and requests SRO response, that is saved in our computer-aided dispatch system as a response out. Now it's going to be cleared differently, and it might be put in just as maybe a welfare check. So if somebody's having a mental health crisis on campus and our SRO responds out, they might find that it doesn't meet the criteria to do the psychiatric hold. It will just be left in the computer system as a welfare check, but it will record that the officer went out. And that's why we try to encourage administration to call dispatch rather than using the cell phone of the SRO, because we want to have that stuff captured.
Right, that makes sense. Thanks.
Sorry. This is a question for Katie, but I think the answer may have implications to the task force. I mean, I keep hearing that, we have one SRO that, if I'm identifying the Los Altos High SRO, that SRO is actually shared among 16 schools. I have that correct, right, Katie?
Yes, you do.
Okay. And yet this task force is tasked with assessing that program, coming up with recommendations as to how to guide the SRO as to how we want them to behave on campus, or even to be on campus. And I'm having trouble all of a sudden grokking that, because it's only 1/16 of the SRO, and maybe other schools have other ways of doing things. And are we going to be asking this SRO to behave a certain way on our campus, but not that way on other campuses? I'm suddenly having some conceptual problems with our charter.
Okay, so let me just try to explain as best I can, Jeanine. I gave the history, like the whole scope of what the SRO does, just so you guys kind of understand that this is not just a devoted to Los Altos High School SRO. They have a lot of responsibilities. This task force is just looking at the high school, because based on the feedback that we get in the town hall, the feedback or the concerns about the SRO's interaction were at the high school only. A lot of the interaction at the elementary and middle school is strictly educational. They're out there doing presentations and programming. Whatever the task force determines for Los Altos High School will apply just to Los Altos High School. So if the task force decides they don't want that officer on campus, then that will just apply to Los Altos High School. It's not going to impact the rest of our program. The remainder of our SRO program will remain the same. You guys are just looking at our program at the high school campus only. And that's okay. We will work with that.
Okay, so I can understand either they're on campus or they're not on campus, but I'm more concerned about the subtle differences. What if the task force, I'm speculating, but what if the task force decides that there is a role for this resource on campus, but they want them to follow a certain set of guidelines as to how they interact with students or how students interact with them, and that's unique to Los Altos High versus, say, the other schools. Is that something that your department could actually support?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think the beauty of having this session is that we're getting information that I know I didn't have before, just about what this SRO is and the fact that there's 16 schools. I had no idea. So that's the beauty of this. Our purpose is to gather information, get the data, and then, we pull back and see exactly what we've got. So Captain Krauss, it's just been wonderful. Your information has been just very, very helpful. Angel, back to you.
Okay, Toni.
Okay, something you said just struck me, and I'm just wondering if I could get information on why this would happen. You mentioned that you sometimes get called on campus, for example, for a 72-hour hold, and then may determine that is not, it's just a welfare check instead. Why is the police, the SRO, making that determination? Is it because the school psychologist isn't available at that time, or?
So sometimes a student is going to make claims of self-harm, or maybe they made claims of self-harm on social media, and a counselor or school administrator is concerned about it. Our officers will respond out. Our officers, there's only certain people that can make basically a 72-hour hold or a 5150. You're basically taking someone's rights away because you're making them go get psychiatric help. It's not an arrest.
No, I do it all the time with students in my student health center, but I'm the one who makes the determination of whether to call the police. So once I've made that determination, they take the student. So I was just curious, who is calling the police officer to make that determination instead of the counselor at school being the one to do that?
So typically it's the administration is who's calling us. There are only certain, I don't know, to be honest with you, if the school counselor has the ability to do a 72-hour hold. I know medical professionals do, officers do, but I'm not sure about the level as a school counselor. And so I'm not sure on that. That would be a great question to ask when school administration comes on to your guys' task force meeting. What I do know is that sometimes school administration, they err on the side of caution. If there's any chance at all the student might have self-harm, they will call us out, and the counselor as well, if they're available, to make the determination. And sometimes the officer will sit and have a conversation with the student and find that they are not currently a risk to themselves. It was either an attention-getting strategy or they were just having a bad moment. And in those cases, we typically will reach out to the parents and encourage them to take them on a voluntary trip to psychiatric help instead of doing the 72-hour hold. So we're really just trying to make the determination if they meet the qualifications for the 5150 hold, and if they don't meet it, then we're just going to keep it as a welfare check and contact the parents for further resources.
But just for clarification on her question, when you say the officer, you're not talking necessarily the SRO, correct?
I'm talking, so if we have a 5150 call at the high school, we're going to send an officer right away.
Right.
SRO, it's always for your understanding, when we get a call at the high school for any matter, the first priority is that we send the SRO because of their special training. But like I said earlier, they can't always come. There are certain calls that the school administration will let pend or wait till the school resource officer is available. And those are cases where it might not be something that's an immediate emergency, something they can wait. Okay, well, we'll pull the student out in 2 class periods to discuss this, and they'll wait for the school resource officer. But things like a 5150 or something like that, we can't wait for that. And so any officer might respond to that. So when I say officer, it could be SRO or any officer that responds.
So just so people know, the 5150 is a code section in the Health and Safety Code, California's Health and Safety Code, and it gives the authority to have someone actually taken in and held, even against the person's will, for a period up to, doesn't have to necessarily be that, up to 72 hours at a psychiatric facility. And usually it's at Barbara Aaron's Pavilion in San Jose. So just so you know, that's the 5150. That's what we're talking about.
And we typically on 5150s, in the past, we would have to take them to VMC, Valley Medical Center.
That's it, right.
Psychiatric services.
Right.
What we try to do now is Uplift is a program in Campbell. Uplift is juvenile specific. And so obviously that's a better place to take 5150s because they're focused on juveniles. And we don't want to take juveniles to Valley Medical Center if we can help it. However, Uplift does have certain requirements. They can't be combative. They can't be under the influence of any drugs or alcohol, and they have to have bed space. So before we can take them there, we have to call Uplift and see if they have a bed. There are certain cases in which they do not, and we have to take them then to an alternate location.
Judge Cordell, if I may, I just wanted to
go right ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine. And I didn't raise my virtual hand. So the first thing I wanted to respond to was something Ms. Valadez had asked about the scope of the task force and whether or not we would really be able to make recommendations related to that scope. During the City Council discussion on the task force and what we wanted to focus on, at least one council member had suggested we focus on SROs and any other law enforcement officers at the high school. There wasn't support for that. We wanted to keep it very narrowly focused on SROs at the high school. But we did say if there are things that we can apply, like if there are learnings from the SRO program that we can apply to our other law enforcement officers who are on campus, that's definitely something we would consider. And then the second thing, it's a follow-up to Renee Rashid's question and Captain Krauss. In one sentence, if possible, we all heard back in 1987 why the SRO program was created. Today, why would you say we still have the SRO program? Is it because of the original reason it was created in 1987, or is the purpose and role of the SRO program today different?
That's a really good question. I believe our goal is still the same. The goal back then was to build relationships with youth and to promote trust between law enforcement and children in order to keep them on the right track, to keep them out of the law enforcement judicial system, to do early intervention for students who might be struggling. That's still our goal, is the building relationships and fostering trust among students. And if I could just, there was something else I wanted to clarify on your first point. I forgot what it was going to be.
Other law enforcement, other Los Altos law enforcement on the high school campus.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of address to the task force. There are recommendations you may make, but I just want to be clear that if we get a call for service of police matter at the high school, we're going to respond. I mean, it's part of, we have to legally. If we have an emergency on campus, if someone calls 911 from the high school campus, a police officer is going to respond. So just know that there can't be a flush like no police on campus allowed, because we have our own duty as our job, and legally we have to respond if a 911 call comes out. So just be aware that if there's an incident on campus, a police officer is going to come, whether it's the SRO, whether that you guys have some control over, but we have to respond to police calls on campus.
Thank you, Captain Krauss.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Renee.
Okay, I think this is my last question. You mentioned that Los Altos High School was requesting a second SRO. Do you know if that one, the intent for that one was to be assigned specifically to Los Altos High School, or would that also be a floating SRO?
It was going to be a floating SRO. The administration wanted them to be just at the high school, but we just couldn't commit that kind of resource. We have too many youth programs going on for us to commit to that. But they did want an SRO to be on campus more often. They would love an SRO on campus full time at the time. Now, this was 3 years ago. They may have changed their perspective on it now, but 3 or 4 years ago when that came about, they did want an SRO on campus more often. But we couldn't commit to that, but we could, the second SRO would allow us to be there more often.
Okay, Jeanine.
Okay, I'm an engineer by discipline, so I tend to love when people are making requests of you for data, although I understand the burden that places on both you and the department, but I think it's a necessary burden, and the smile on your face says at least you understand why we're pressing for data. But my question now is going to be not about data. I'm going to ask you to step back and, everything that you've said, while it has spawned questions in many of our task force members' minds, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I have to be very honest. There's a lot of good stuff in terms of the goals and the objectives of the program and what we're really trying to do, which is diversion from the criminal justice system. And that by itself is a very good goal. However, we all heard the town hall, and we've heard the students talk outside of the town hall. We understand Justice Vanguard's objectives. We've heard other people outside of Justice Vanguard talk about their own personal experiences. I have a personal experience with the police department, being a 31-year resident here. My question to you is that, despite all of these good intentions, why do you think the SRO program at Los Altos High School, I'll just keep it to that scope, has raised so much concern? Why was there so much tough feedback that came back through that town hall? What do you think the source of it is?
So let me address first. I just want to be clear that I was concerned as well with the town hall meeting, because that information has never come back to the police department before that town hall. We have never heard from a school teacher. We have never heard from a school administrator that we have had issues on campus. It has never been reported to us. We've never had a student report anything to our police department saying that they felt unsafe. So it came as a surprise to us as well, and I am very concerned, especially about the teachers who feel like our officers on campus have been inappropriate in their actions, because I would like to think that would have been raised to us somehow. So that has never been brought to our attention. I think you're asking me why this is at the forefront now. Obviously, police reform and police policies are at the forefront now just because of the issues that have been happening over the last 6 to 8 months and beyond that. But I think just that the social justice push that has been coming recently has brought everything in policing under a microscope, including the SRO program. And so I think maybe because of all of this, people are feeling more encouraged or empowered to speak about their experiences, where before they may not have been empowered to speak about their experiences. But why the SRO program in general, I can't answer that for you, Jeanine. I know that there has been a lot of media attention to SRO programs nationwide, and a push to get police officers nationwide. And that's why I really wanted to explain to the task force that not all SRO programs are the same. And so an Oakland Police Department or Oakland SRO program may be very different than what we're doing. And they may be doing, just keep that in mind when you're looking at things. This is not, we're not on campus as a security detail. We're not on campus as an enforcement arm. That's not our model. And I don't think when you start talking to students, teachers, and administrators, you will find that that is what we have done with our program in the past.
Okay, thank you. Just my closing comment on that is I was very, when I was hearing the feedback in the town hall, I was rather critical, I will say. I was trying to be very critical in terms of understanding if the feedback of concern towards the SRO program was coming from, say, outside of the city, because I'm familiar with other cities and their programs. But now doing my homework and understanding most of the kids that spoke up and most of the young adults, recent alumni that spoke up, they are specifically from Los Altos High. So I don't necessarily, I'm not ready to cast out their views as, necessarily just sparked by the media or because they're not from our city and don't understand our SRO program. I think there's something that's why these interviews of students and teachers are going to be very, very important, because sometimes things are hidden in plain sight, if you understand what I'm saying. And even with the best intentions, things might not come to the surface that should come to the surface. So I hope that those interviews are fruitful.
No, and I agree. And I don't mean to say that they're making up these things being sparked by the media. I'm just saying that they feel empowered now to share their stories and experiences that they have had due to the fact that the attention is being made on this. And while we haven't had any students come forward to say that they felt unsafe with police on campus, I'm not saying that is not a valid feeling that they're having. And maybe it's police in uniform. This is intimidating to people. Just by the nature of the uniform we wear and the gun we wear on our belt, it can be intimidating to people. And so we recognize that. And that's why we're looking to you guys to come up with, okay, are there different ways we can do this in order to make students feel safe while still maybe building those relationships? But that's why we're looking for feedback from the task force.
Thank you. And I'm going to jump in now. We've been going for 2 hours. We have 1 hour left. And we need to devote some time talking about what we want to do for the next meeting and getting that set up. We also have another captain here who can talk to us about the complaint process. I'm not sure that we're ready for that just yet. So let us do this. It is 5:59. All right. So let us take at most another 15 minutes of Captain Krauss's time if you have any other questions. And then let's just stop and think about what we want to do for the next meeting and kind of feel that out. And then we can pick up if we want to, if you are reminded to do that, to talk about the complaint process. So another 15 minutes. Let me just throw in a question, and it's purely speculation, Captain Krauss. There's been some research that shows that when there are female police officers dealing with interactions, they tend to be able to resolve interactions without violence. And there's research that's on this, that if you have a greater female presence in law enforcement, you tend to have fewer violent kinds of confrontations. Do you think that the gender would make a difference with the SRO? That if I don't know if there have been within the last 5 years female SROs, if they've made a difference, or if you feel that that's a consideration that ought to be thought about.
I do know your research, Judge Cordell, that does show that females tend to have fewer use of force incidents in police work. And that's why I'm really happy. We just hired a new female, and she started Monday with the police department. So I think we're now up to 6 or 7 females on our department. So I think it's fantastic. I was the last female to serve as the school resource officer, and that was 6 years ago, I think. I did a 3-year stint in that position. I don't know if it makes a difference. So I think there's it kind of tosses up, because whereas females tend to be better with the communication aspect, male officers tend to build a better rapport with male students. There are a lot of male students who feel apprehension with a female police officer in sharing some more of the personal details of their life a little bit. And I think that's a gender barrier there. I think I probably had an easier time talking to our female students who were victims of sexual abuse and issues like that, because they feel like they can disclose more. And if we ever have a female student or any victim of a crime who feels uncomfortable talking about something with a specific gender, we always have the availability to bring a female in. One of our detectives currently is a female, and almost every shift has a female on the force. And so in those cases, we do offer, if they're uncomfortable or we're finding we're not getting the information we need and there's not that rapport, to bring a female in order to have that rapport with a female victim. But I think it goes both ways. I think the male SROs, when they go out and just throw football around and shoot basketball hoops at the middle school, it's a little bit different of an interaction than I was able to foster. So I think it goes both ways. I was a teacher before, so I think that lends itself a little bit in order to me being an SRO, is that I was around young kids. So when I was a school resource officer, I built in a lot more of the elementary programming. And that's the thing about our SRO program. I know Jeanine was talking about her worries about, changing it too much. Each one of our SROs that comes into the position brings their own touch to it. It's not like we have some rigid thing that they have to follow. So when I came in, I did a lot more of the classes and presentations because that's where I was comfortable and that was where my strengths were. Ryan Langoni and Josh Cottrell, they have more of a sports background and interest. So they might go out and play a little bit more sports and pick them up games like that. So they just have a different way. And so each SRO brings their own unique personality to the program and changes it a little bit for the next person.
And last, quickly, how about language issues? If there are people who are, primarily not English speakers, is that an issue at the high school?
We haven't found it to be. We do have translation. We will ask for an officer who can come if we need translation services. Sometimes it happens more in communication with the parents that we need to have an officer come in order to more accurately or completely give all the information to a parent. We haven't really had those issues so far at the high school. We only have currently 2 officers who are Spanish speaking right now. And so because we're a small department, our resources are more limited, but we will go to outside agencies to assist Mountain View, Palo Alto if we need interpretation services.
Great. Okay, Angel, anybody else in the queue?
So before we go on, there was a question in the chat regarding a recording of the police town hall that was held in July. That is on the city's website. We will send a link out to the task force rather than making you go and dig through the city website.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you.
So we'll send that out.
Thank you.
And so then, John.
Okay, we have 10 more minutes.
Real quick, at one time the research showed, and I don't know if it still does, probably Judge Cordell or one of the police captains would know, that there was a pattern that when there was an absence of a strong male figure in a young man's life, that they were more likely to get involved with gangs. And that's one reason why I've always thought that athletic programs at schools are good, because coaches serve as a kind of father substitute or role model. And I would think a male SRO might be able to do the same thing as well.
Okay. Any other comments, questions from anyone? Captain, I think we've done it. Thank you so much. The information you brought us is just wonderful. And thank you so much for following up on the data requests. And again, as soon as you can get it to whomever to get it to us, terrific. Thank you. And please, if you want to stay with us, that's fine.
Yeah,
we're going to talk.
Just so you know, Judge Cordell, Captain McCross and I will be on every task meeting. Most of the time, we're just going to be in the background, available to answer questions. So we will be here every meeting for you guys.
You have my condolences.
I'm going to go use the restroom. I'm going to give the computer back to Captain McCross, and then he'll take down.
All right. Okay? All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, folks, let us talk for a moment about next week's meeting. I have a suggestion. First, we're going to have data. So we're going to have probably Captain Krauss or one of the other captain to talk to us about the data. And hopefully you'll get it ahead of time. And I ask that you please look at it, and come with your questions. So we'll spend part of the meeting looking at data. And I don't want to spend a large part of it, but maybe, just thinking out loud now, maybe 30 minutes. Then I think we should have the next meeting where we should bring in people. We should hear from school administrators. And I believe this would be from Los Altos. I don't know who that would be, but I have to leave it to the folks at the school. And I'm hoping that someone who is helping us support staff for this will reach out to the high school to say that the task force wants to hear from administration specifically about the SROs on campus. But there's faculty, there are students, there are parents. If we just were to focus on those, do you have some ideas? We got feedback at the town hall meeting. I don't think we want to just kind of open the floodgates again. That's why we had the town hall meeting. Do you have some suggestions or ideas about how we can get a finite number of people, representative group from parents, students, faculty, staff, to come talk to us about the SRO? Anybody have any thoughts on this? Is it worthwhile to even do it that way? Is it unwieldy? Can it be done? I just need to hear your thoughts.
Judge Cordell, this is Janet. I was thinking that you're right. We don't want to get bombarded with an unwieldy number of comments that aren't help us support. So here's just a brainstorming idea. But what if we were to ask the administration to send us representatives from the administration, from the counseling program, some teachers? Maybe we talk to the PTA and ask them to send us representatives of parents. Maybe we talk to the student body. They probably have an elected student council, and ask them to send some representatives.
Okay. One thing I'm concerned about is I don't want the administration cherry picking. I don't know what they would do, but I don't want cherry picking where they're going to pick people who maybe don't have views that the administration shares. So how do we guard against that and make sure we get some diverse views in? I like the idea, by the way. I mean, we can go through these places to have them designate people, but how do we make sure we're really getting a cross-section of views?
Yeah, that's a good question. It worries me about even how we do that in, say, 2.5 or 2 hours, how we get enough viewpoints in. And you guys listed most of my groups. It's the schools, the students, we need to hear from them, but there's a lot of stories that we haven't heard yet that I'd like to be able to find a way for us to get. So, Judge, I like your idea of, in 2 meetings covering the SRO program, second one being interviews, but I feel that there kind of needs to be some work in between the meetings. Maybe there's a way for us to reach out, with simple questionnaire, as it were.
Welcome to my world.
We introduce, it's very hard to get information, but we introduce, in case they don't know about the task force, tell them our charter, ask them to share experiences they've had with the SRO program, and then ask their opinions about primary goals. Do they feel those goals are being met? Any suggestions for improvement? And are there goals or issues that should be added? Just so we can get their perspective on the SRO program in that way.
Sure.
Hopefully it'll elicit stories, suggestions, and positive and negative experiences.
How many students, does anyone know how many? I'm following up on what you're saying, Curtis, so I think this is something we need to talk about. How many students are at Los Altos High School? How many faculty? How many staff? Can anybody have the numbers?
About 2,000 students.
2,000?
Yeah, I don't know about faculty and staff.
Okay, so here's the thing. We'd have to have a feedback form developed, and we'd have to get it distributed to 2,000 students, to all the faculty and all the staff. And I can tell you now, and even if you set a deadline, and no one's there at their homes, so we could have to email it out, we're not going to get this work done in 6 weeks then. It's just not going to happen, because you have to give people time to fill all this stuff out. And particularly if it's a form where you're really soliciting, tell us how you feel, and but instead of a maybe check the box thing, rate the SRO, and you have 1 to 10 versus and even have that, but still have them be able to write, because maybe there's some anecdotal information they have. That's going to take time. So I'm throwing that out. I'm not trying to be a naysayer here, but we want to be very realistic about how we're going to go about doing this. We got a lot of feedback from the town hall meeting. Some of it was anecdotal. So either we're going to have to, let everybody weigh in, or we're going to have to figure out a way to get a representative group. And that goes back to what the mayor was saying about, well, we could say to administration, we want to hear from, I don't know, 4 people. I'm not sure. So talk to me more, please. I'm just thinking out loud.
I have a suggestion. When it comes to administration and teachers and counselors, I think that you could probably ask Wynn to come up with a representative. She knows her teachers, she knows her counselors, she knows.
Who is that? Who is that?
Oh, I'm sorry, Wynn Satterwhite, the principal. Wynn Satterwhite, the principal of Los Altos High.
And I'll just interject here. So I've reached out to MVLA and the contact if we want to invite someone from the administration or send a survey or send a list of questions. They want us to work through Nellie Meyer, the superintendent. So that's who we would work with directly if we're looking to have a representative voice from the administration. Now, Nellie may say, she'll have Wynn. I have no idea what will happen when we make the request, but that is the contact for the MVLA school administration.
Okay, so my suggestion has nothing to do with that cadre of people. My suggestion is purely about the students. Neysa, does the dictum from the superintendent also apply to interviews with students? We have to go through her?
No, this is strictly the administration.
Okay, so for the students, what I think something akin to a kind of a combination between the town hall and the application process for this very task force. You basically sent out an RFI, a request for information, a request for participation, and then students. That could be an email that the school sends to all of its students, and then somebody would have to formulate that letter, what that query is, and then you say you're going to take with 2,000 kids. Probably a reasonable sample is. I don't know if any of us are statisticians amongst us, but I would imagine that with 2,000 kids, probably 50 to 100 representative voices are statistically significant. Somebody could tell us what that number is and then say that we're looking for that number of respondents that would be interested in being part of a small group interview process. And then we conduct small group interviews, say of, 5 to 7 kids at a time. Where we ask them all the same questions and gather the data anecdotally, and we have our own little, rubric that we use to gather the data. Because to me, that's the only way in the course of 1 or 2 weeks, which is what we want to allot to this project, that we are going to be able to get any kind of information. If we have 1,000 surveys or 2,000 surveys, we're not going to be able to compile the data. It's going to take us 2 weeks just to come up with the questionnaire. But if we can invite people to talk with us, then I'm certain, knowing Los Altos High kids, and maybe with the help of a teacher that is in touch with the pulse of some of the undervoiced kids, I think I know a couple of teachers that are along that vein. We might be able to encourage them to meet with us. They're already doing their homework on the computer, so they probably could join a small Zoom meeting and kind of get information that way. I can't think of any other way to get student input in such a short time.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple of suggestions. So one is, I do think we should send like an email or message to all students, but I think additionally we should also focus on some of the student groups that are directly related to students of color, since these have disproportionately affected those students. And so let's reach out to the heads of those groups, the student heads of those groups, to ask them to share any stories that they may have from any of their group members. Also, just in terms of operational timeline, since taking these surveys may take some time, we might want to consider moving the agenda from meeting 4, where we start getting the information about the other police reporting process up front, so that we can give ourselves more time to process all the interviews. So maybe move that from meeting 4 to meeting 2, and move this interviewing process to meeting 3 or 4.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk though, because one of you suggested maybe we'll talk to I'm not a statistician, but someone threw out a number like 50 or 100. Now, if you have 50 interviews or 100 interviews where you're going to have students come in, I just want you all to be realistic about what we're talking about here. These are not going to be 5-minute interviews, and you might have 5 students at a time, but they're all going to want to talk. So be very realistic if you start to, and again, I don't have a counter proposal now. I just want us to think realistically about this task you're setting forth. So there's one theory that goes, I'm hearing from you all, let's just, send an email. We have to develop, and that have to have staff do that, develop some sort of a questionnaire of some kind, a feedback form that would go out asking questions, and we want them to have information, if they would, give their names, what grade, and optional, they could check, a box for ethnicity, and then whatever questions we want. That has to be developed. If it goes out to 2,000, not everybody's going to respond. We know that. That's just not the way people do. So even if you get 500, if you get 300, then you have to begin the process of, well, how do you sort out from the 300 who it is you want to interview? And if you decide a representative sample is 20, 25, think about the time that's going to take. I will tell you, I would love to hear all of their feedback. I would love it. But if you have smaller groups hearing it, that is from the task force, all of us are not going to be able to hear that. We'll get a report back, but we won't be able to actually see the students and maybe hear back. So, there's kind of drawbacks, but pluses to doing it that way. Another is, if you can think of a way where you can not have to do a big survey, but for example, a suggestion from, oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm missing your name. You just spoke about looking at groups, student groups of color, or athletic groups, and getting representatives from all of those particular organizations or groups. That might get you the cross section you want. So it's not just groups of color, but they must have all kinds of clubs there that maybe could encompass a larger setting. And then you can have them either have a representative come, and then we have that, and maybe devote an entire meeting to just having that input. But again, that's just students. That's not faculty, and that's not the administration, and that's not staff. So
if I might jump in for just a second. This is Jan. During the interviews that we had, there was a suggestion of, for example, for the faculty to do a survey of the faculty to get their input. And I know it would take a little while to get a survey put together, but there were also other folks who applied for this task force who we didn't select, who were very interested in working with data. We could reach out to them to ask if they would help in collating responses from a survey. So I think, we probably do have some other resources out there that we can get, but just from my input or my reaction to those suggestions during the interviews, that sounded like a good way to get input from a cross section of all the teachers or the staff when we won't be able to actually talk to all of them.
Judge Cordell, if I could also jump in really quick.
Go right ahead, please.
One suggestion that was made was to send out a request to all of the students at the high school, just so that the task force is aware the city doesn't have that contact information, so we'd be relying on the school district to provide it. We can certainly ask them to help us out if that's the desire of the task force, but if the school district says no, that may not be an option. And I will admit I do not know If the school district is going to be willing to do that, if we can send something to them and they send it out to their students, that would have to be a conversation we'd have to have with them.
And that would be with the superintendent?
Yes, that was
Okay.
As Vice Mayor Fligor was saying, with the superintendent.
And can I add, everybody's making suggestions, Judge Cordell, I will just add my suggestion. So a couple things. One is, you know, I appreciate John Maginot mentioning the town hall, and he'll be sending the link to everybody, because I think the input and feedback we received at the town hall is already information we can factor into any recommendations we may consider. The second thing I wanted to mention, I liked Renee Rashid's suggestion of maybe alternating the topics so that people have 2 weeks to work on whatever we decide to do. So for example, next week, we could look at the complaint process, have Captain McCrowson present, and then the third week, we have the report back from the subgroups on what they've learned. And so for the school administration, we have to handle that. The city staff and council would contact the school administration directly and invite them to that third week to speak directly to you. With regards to faculty, parents, and students, you know, maybe we have their 9 members on the task force, have 3 groups of 3, 1 assigned to faculty, 1 assigned to parents, 1 assigned to students. And those subgroups will basically spend the next 2 weeks, and it would be a Brown Act violation. They would spend the next 2 weeks developing, you know, questions, surveys, whatever they think they would be able to put together and do outreach to the students, whatever group they're targeting, and then pull a report back that third week. And to your concern, Judge Cordell, about, you know, not being there to get the information directly and relying on the secondhand report, I do think that works. I understand the value in having that direct contact and hearing it out of the individual's mouth. But I think if we do have subgroups coming back and reporting, the faculty subgroup, the teacher subgroup, and the student subgroup, I think that may be one way to approach it.
Okay, so thank you for that. So if there were these different subgroups, one issue a concern I have is that if they're each developing their own forms to get feedback, the task force it's not coming from the entire task force. And I might see a form that group A developed and might say, well, wait a minute, why did you put that in, or why not include something? So I think if we decide to do this, we need to have something that is standardized, that, you know, we all have agreement on. And so that's just one issue. And the other is, I just think if you do this, the time frame you're giving, like 2 weeks to do, it's not realistic. I mean, it's going to take time to develop a form. And you could even ask staff to maybe draft a model or something, but it has to come to all of us, and we have to be able to weigh in and review it. Then getting it out and say, okay, here's a subgroup that's just going to deal with students. You can't just do that in 2 weeks. I mean, you have to get it out. You have to figure out who it is you're contacting. If it's 2,000 or if it's representatives from groups, then they have to take time to fill it out. Then it has to come back in, and it has to be, as you said, you know, somebody's got to look at the data and kind of give us, you know, what's going on here. Then you say you want to do interviews. You know, some of them these subgroups, I guess, are doing their own interviews. And I guess you're Zooming those. So, but you can't do those till you get the forms back and they're all filled in. So, I mean, realistically, this is something that's not going to be done in 2 weeks or even 4 weeks or 6 weeks. I mean, and I have no problem. Flexibility is fine. If we want to take up complaint process, you know, next week, that's fine. That's fine. But we really need to come up now with a methodology. How do you want to we have the town hall meeting input. How do you want to get, because I'm hearing a kind of a sense in the group that you do want to do additional outreach. You want to reach out to students, faculty, staff, and if I missed students, faculty, staff, administration. So if that's the sense of the group, we really need to come up with a methodology now. So we've got one that says, let's have subcommittees. And subcommittees develop their own kind of forms, and then they get them out, get them back in, I guess, analyze them. And I guess the subcommittees are also saying, yeah, we'll interview individuals that we will select from the forms we get back. That's a lot.
No, and Judge Cordell, on the, for example, on the student subgroup, let's say, they may decide the best way to reach that demographic is social media, posting somewhere saying, Los Altos formed a task force, we want to hear back from you, come to our meeting on this date. Like, they would be able to figure out what's the best way to engage students to want to give feedback to this group. On the faculty,
let me stop you. Let me just stop you right there. So you're saying you wouldn't necessarily, a student subgroup wouldn't have a feedback form of anything. It would just say, be basically a shout out on Facebook or Twitter, or all that stuff, Instagram, saying, hey, you want to have input on this, then do something. That's what you're saying. That might be an approach. I think that's problematic because you don't know that you're really reaching as many students as you might want to. I just think it's not very scientific. I mean, if you report back and say we put on social media and we got 50 responses, well, there's 2,000 students, and some of them may not want to do that. So I don't know.
Judge,
I'm just thinking out loud. Go right ahead. Sure.
Can I step in? I'm totally on board with the data collection and statistics. No one loves it more than me. We don't have the time to do that.
That's right.
But I think there's definitely a consensus that we need some more data. And it's like fishing. We don't know where to get the data in. So if I can try to synthesize some of what I've heard, I think we do need, in 3 different channels, whether it's subgroups or not, come up with a set of questions that we need to reach out to the student group, the administration, the parents, for example. And it'd be nice if we could review those questions next week and decide, yep, these are the questions we're going to go out. Here's some ideas on channels to reach of those 3 groups. Then we rely on city staff and ourselves to do that. And then that data is going to kind of pour in, and we're maybe not going to do a mathematical statistical study of it, but at least we'll have 200 stories